So welcome everyone. I'm Paula Tedesco. I'm the chair of the Ringwood Stigma-Free Task Force. I'm delighted to have with us tonight for Mental Health Monday, Stephen Fidelday. He's the Director of Special Services K through 8, Ringwood School District. And he's going to be talking about very innovative program that he began in the schools for universal mental health screening. So excited that you can all hear about this. Ringwood is truly a leader in this endeavor, and let's support Steve in getting this to be a statewide initiative. Steve, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for joining us. Ms. Schifoletti, I saw you jump on. Ms. Walker's coming on in as well. So this is great to see familiar names and faces, and to have everyone out tonight. Thank you all for making time. Like Paul said, my name is Steve Fidelity. I'm the Director of Special Services for the Ringwood Public Schools. And I really wanted to start with thanking the students, because it's the students that are braving this new path of destigmatizing mental health and being brave enough to have the conversations and want to have the conversations. And in many times leading families to having these conversations. But also thank you to the families for giving their consent and their permission for this to happen, and getting comfortable being uncomfortable around the dinner table talking about mental health. A thank you to the Board of Ed and the Ringwood Board of Ed and Dr. Bernice, the superintendent, for their continued support in these endeavors and their approvals for these procedures. A thank you to the special services staff who spends endless hours going over protocols, procedures, comparing instruments to truly find what's best for the children of Ringwood. And a thank you to our teaching staff. While the special services staff gets to swoop in like aunts and uncles to provide the mental health support, ultimately we then give them back to their classroom teachers. So it's those classroom teachers that provide that warm, nurturing classroom experience. So thanks to them as well. So tonight we're going to be talking about how Ringwood is really leading New Jersey in universal mental health screening in the schools. Starting off tonight, because it is Indigenous Peoples Day, I wanted to start with just a quick land acknowledgement, just in terms of the rich culture that is in Ringwood, with the Rampo, Lenape, Munsee, Delaware Nation, and in particular the Turtle Clan and the Ringwood schools. It's such a wonderful town to live in, but also the richness of being able to work with these Indigenous tribes and Indigenous students. It's such an incredible experience, and it's part of the richness why I've stayed in Ringwood as long as I have. So where did this all start in terms of mental health? Well, there's really, just like there's a very detailed pathway back from COVID on how to get back to schools, there's not a great pathway laid out in any formal training whatsoever on how to tackle mental health in schools. So really this all started, I want to say about 4 or 5 years ago, around crisis interventions. The students making comments about wanting to hurt themselves or others. Many places in New Jersey, this is still handled simply by an unstructured interview, where a counselor or psychologist or a social worker will meet with the students and ask them some questions. But it was really lacking teeth. It wasn't evidence-based. And what we saw was a lot of kids were ending up needing to go out for medical clearance to come back to school, because we just didn't have the procedures to make sure they were well taken care of. So when I took over as director, we adopted the Columbia Lighthouse Project, the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. So this is used when students make comments about wanting to hurt themselves. What we saw after the first 2 years was a 73% reduction in the number of students that needed to be sent out for medical evaluation. So previously, where we didn't have these standard operating procedures, we didn't have evidence-based instruments, so many students were going out because we were erring on the side of caution, because we didn't want to miss an opportunity or miss a student who might need support without those protocols in place. So we felt really on solid footing with the risk assessments, but then we needed to expand it, because we saw, especially at the middle school, signs of students engaging in non-suicidal self-injurious behavior, and also how to handle threats to others. We've all seen on the news about the mass violence that's taken place in schools and the threats that have, previously been warning signs that went unheeded. So what we did was we went and we put protocols in place for students engaging in non-suicidal self-injurious behavior, and protocols in place for students who made threats towards others. So we were feeling really great at this point. This is probably, I guess, going back now almost 3 years ago. We have all of these protocols in place and continue to have them in place. They're standardized. We have the rating scales of where a student falls and what the response should be. And everyone's on the same page. There's just greater transparency, greater support, and less students and families needing to go out to the emergency room to get cleared. So it was about 2 or 3 years ago then that we were like, okay, we've got this buttoned up, but how can we do one better? And the eureka moment for me was really a combination of twofold. It was reading the NPR article by Allison Aubrey. And it was this NPR article that called for the American Association, I believe, of Pediatricians, called for universal screening for depression for all teens. And it just made sense. It made sense that all students and all children should be screened for depression. And this was paired up around the same time I got my hands on the book, What Made Maddie Run. Madison Holleran was a student from Northern Highlands who went to UPenn and ultimately took her life there as a freshman. And it made me wonder how Maddie's story could have been different if there was universal screening, if her high school engaged in universal screening. And one thing, even though today's presentation is about our role in the pre-K-8 Ringwood district, looking to expand it to high school, but also then to champion this work for colleges. Because for any of you who have kids who are in college or approaching college, it's such a pivotal time in their lives. They're plucked from their homes and hopefully will be in a non-COVID time and sent away to school. And they don't have the comfort of familiar friends, of their family around them, to have dinners, to share their emotions, to be supported. And my soapbox for the colleges is that at colleges we pay extra supplies and extra fees to park, to use copiers, to use scanners, to access the Wi-Fi. There's so many fees built into our college tuition. What parent wouldn't be willing to pay an extra $20, $25 to make sure that there was universal mental health screening for their child, especially in their first year as they're adjusting to this radically different way of living? So it was reading these two articles, this article and this book, and the book by Kate Fagan is phenomenal. It's equal parts Maddie's story, which the Hollerans opened up all of Maddie's personal emails and iMessages and her phone for Kate Fagan to go through. But then the other part is also on the impact of social media on students' mental health. So if you haven't read the book, I highly recommend. I have some people in the waiting room. I want to make sure I get them in. Welcome, Ms. Gorney. Welcome, Ms. Liggett. So it was reading What Made Maddie Run, along with looking at this article and saying, this just makes sense. We need to get upstream from all of this. So to work upstream, we knew, and we continue to know, that the number one leading cause to suicide is untreated depression. So this all just made sense. Maddie's story, the American pediatricians are calling for it. So what do is we look to the schools, which then usually raises the question, why schools? And there are a lot of great reasons why. One is when you look at the reliance on interagency communication. So let's say the American Academy of Pediatricians calls for universal screening. So every kid that goes to the pediatrician gets screened for depression. We now need to have some sort of format for the dozens of different pediatricians kids see as a way to communicate to the schools how they all scored on this instrument. And we know that when you get that many different agencies together, there's typically a breakdown in communication. Another reason is just simply our ethical responsibility. If we have the capability to screen these students and see how they're doing and see what types of support they have, then we should be asking these questions. The third piece is we're institutions that are built to educate. And if students are suffering from mental health struggles, then we know that that's adversely going to be impacting their educational performance as well. So if it's our goal to clear the barriers out of students' way so they can access their education, mental health certainly plays a role in that. The fourth piece we talk about is equity. Not all students are going to get their annual physicals. Not all students are going to see a pediatrician. Not all students, we'll talk about later, have access to mental health care. So it's a level playing field. The public schools, where we offer free and appropriate public education to all students, is the place where we can do this and monitor all of our students. Another reason why we look to schools is the delay of treatment. So we know that so many mental health struggles start before the age of 14. And unfortunately, there's a delay of treatment between 8 to 10 years from the onset of symptomology to the start of treatment. So if we're averaging 8 to 10 years for treatment, universal screening is the answer for that. Let's not wait. Let's be proactive, work our way upstream. Let's ask the difficult questions of students so we can provide them the desperately needed support. And then the last piece is more concrete. It's a dollars and cents piece. So we talked about the ethical piece, which is first and foremost, but when we looked at the cost to the individual, which is the ethically right thing to do, is to provide the support, but the cost to the community as well. If we wait those 8 to 10 years from onset to treatment, and it's getting in the way of a student's learning, we think of all the costs. You know, the costs to universally screen can be done oftentimes with the staff that we have in-house, and that's what we were able to do in the Ringwood schools at no additional cost. It was just a matter of personnel relocation and assigning them to different responsibilities at different points throughout the day. But rather than spending a whole day doing a risk assessment on a student who says they want to kill themselves, let's spend those hours working with kids proactively. And we know that the cost of out-of-district tuition for students who have such mental health struggles that they need to go to a private out-of-district placement can be upwards of $150,000. So why don't we spend our resources supporting all students so they can stay in their home schools, get the support they need, and be proactive instead of being reactive. So we put in the safety net. It was about 2 years ago. It took about 1.5 years for us to work through the standard operating procedures, to find the right instruments, to have the attorney review it, to have the board approve it, to have the superintendent send it to the board. It took some time to get this together for us to start universally screening for depression. Last year was our first year at Ryerson, and we put the safety net in place. And what was amazing was that we had over 90% active consent. So over 90% of our families said, yes, we want our kids to get this support. So last year was the first year at Ryerson we opened this up, and we were just looking at depression. And you can see by our results that we were in really great shape. This is our fall baseline, and we continue to be in really good shape. So our fall baseline here, hold on one second. Oh, somebody already let them in. Thank you. We had another person coming on in. So when we look at this, these are the chances of depression for all the students who were provided active consent. And we were about half the rate of students that the instrument, the Columbia Depression Inventory, anticipated. So the Columbia Depression Scale that we use anticipated about 12% of the population being in the highest two ranges, the highly likely, and the likely range of having depression. And in the Ringwood schools, we were only around 6%, which was wonderful to see. But what we wanted to see was the improvement over time. So what we said was, we're going to take the students that fall in the highest two categories, the students that came up in red and orange, in the highly likely and the likely range, and we're going to provide school-based mental health support. We're going to refer parents and let them know of perform care and outside support services. But we recognize it's our responsibility to deal with mental health issues within the school, school-based mental health, not medical, not clinical services, but school-based support, to see if we could improve their well-being and improve their access to the education. So the next slide I'm going to show you all is going to be an expansion of the students that fall in the highest two range. So when we look at our at-risk cohort, what you saw was that very sliver, around 6% of students at Ryerson that fell in these top two ranges. So this was them at the fall. They met with our school social workers, our school psychologists, and our school counselors, and we provided them either weekly or twice a week school-based cognitive behavioral support. And what we saw was a 40% reduction in depressive symptomology from the fall to the winter. So this is the same cohort, again, just the highest two risk groups. So they were in the fall, And then you can see all of that green coming into play. The red's completely gone. We've got green, yellow, and a little bit of orange. So our intervention is working, and students are reporting a 40% decrease in symptomology just based off of a 6 to 8 week intervention of weekly or twice a week school-based support. And this continued. So they continued to get the support all the way through the spring. And we know in the spring it brought us some unique challenges with COVID-19. And the results of the spring are surprisingly still solid. Our students remained resilient. They remained in good shape. Yes, we saw some creeping back of red and an increase in the orange and yellow. But by and large, the students that were at risk in the beginning, we still had approximately like 50% in the very unlikely range in the middle of a global pandemic where there's reports of cases of depression increasing by threefold. So the fact that we had these supports already in play was huge. The interventions were absolutely working. And the results aren't just data driven. It's just not pie charts. Behind all those pie charts are students and their families. And their families who get on the phone with us and they thank us. And they thank us for having these conversations. They're thankful that they live in Ringwood, that we're starting this conversation. We have students that would have otherwise gone unnoticed. Straight A students, top of this, top of that, never seen a school counselor before. And I say at the end of the day that this isn't a difficult problem to solve in terms of our mental health crisis. We just need to ask the questions. Just ask the students the questions. So many school districts spend money on fancy mindfulness rooms. That's great, but it still requires a student who's feeling anxious or depressed to take it upon themselves to go and access those services. And anyone who's suffered from anxiety or depression before knows sometimes it's hard to get out of bed when you're facing depression, let alone when you're sitting in your social studies class. Think to yourself, what I really need is to go use a mindfulness room. What we need to be doing is we need to be screening and providing support earlier. So we've screened, we've provided the support. How do we continue this initiative? And the way we do this is by creating a community of care. We create a community of care through training, through QPR training. And I first came across QPR training at a Spread the Love Foundation workshop in Atlantic City. Carolyn and Megan Coburn run Spread the Love Foundation. Carolyn's daughter and Megan's sister, Sammy, ended up taking her life at the age of 19, and they started the Spread the Love Foundation. And it was in going to these workshops that I was introduced to QPR, and it's similar to CPR, right? Societies and communities that are trained in CPR have lower cardiac arrests. The same is true when we have communities that are trained in QPR, which stands for Question, Persuade, Refer. It doesn't anoint anyone as a social worker or a mental health professional, but what it does do is it creates the opportunity for lay people to know the three steps: how to question someone if they have suicidal ideations or intent, how to persuade them to get help, and who to refer them to. And Hunter Robbins, who is part of Spread the Love, came up and trained the Ryerson staff in QPR last year. So we completed that training at Ryerson. We're looking to expand that training for all of our teachers district-wide and eventually loop back and support and train our students at the middle school as well. Not this year in the middle of the pandemic, but once we have all of our staff trained to come back and do a youth version of QPR. Because oftentimes it's the youth that are most aware of a student or a friend that's struggling with mental health or having suicidal ideations. And oftentimes they don't act quick enough, and we don't want to miss any opportunities. So we look to circle back and train all of our staff and our students at the middle school as well. So we brought these results back to the Board of Education of all the work we were doing, and President Butsalis, issued us a great challenge. She said, this is great. This is great. How can we do this at Hewitt? And she was spot on for identifying the fact that one of the cohorts that we see the biggest increase in completed suicide is young girls between the ages of 9 and 13. 9 being well before we stepped foot into Ryerson. So our goal was to expand our universal screening to Hewitt, and that's what we've done this year. And again, the Hewitt schools, just like up at Ryerson, again, we have over a 90% active consent rate by families saying, yes, please screen my children. Please make sure that they're well taken care of. And we've expanded it not down to Hewitt, but grades 4 through 8, students will be screened for symptoms of anxiety and symptoms of depression. Because we know oftentimes anxiety and depression kind of fall on a continuum together. And for our younger students and for our younger families, rather, the parents are the ones completing out a questionnaire for adverse childhood experiences. So all students pre-K through 3rd grade, probably annoying the heck out of you all with reminders to jump into real time and fill out the survey about adverse childhood experiences, which is abbreviated for ACEs. This eureka moment came from another news article from Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. She's the first Surgeon General in California, and she was calling for every kindergarten student to be screened for adverse childhood experiences. So when you go into real time, folks, if you haven't yet, if you have a preschool to 3rd grader, what we're asking for is the number of adverse experiences that your child's had. We're not asking for specifics, like which adverse experience they had, just how many of the different categories they've been exposed to. And the research shows that parents are more willing to report when it's grouped as a generic number as compared to identifying which specific event. Because we know that when students are exposed to adverse childhood experiences, when they're exposed to toxic stress, it physically changes the makeup of their brain. And what's amazing is that adverse childhood experiences are linked to 8 of the 10 leading causes of death. And that's why ACEs are being referred to as the #1 public health epidemic facing our country right now. So if we can identify students who are exposed to toxic stress, who we can help build resilience and infuse positive childhood experiences and work with families to get them resources to create buffering effects, the beautiful thing that we see from adverse childhood experiences to depression to suicide, all the things we've talked about tonight, there's a key factor behind all of this, and it's the power of connection. The power of having a trusted adult to confide in can offset so many of these negative effects for suicide, for depression, and for the impacts of toxic stress. So how do we go about doing that? And that's where we're shifting our lens as a district to get away from the punitive model of school discipline and shift to restorative practices. The restorative practices continuum that you see up on your screen here, this is copyrighted by the IARP. And again, I have to thank Dr. Bernice, the superintendent, and the Board of Ed for sending me out for the workshops. We sent, I want to say maybe around a dozen teachers out last year, pre-pandemic, to start the workshop. And for those of you who are familiar with education, sometimes you send people out and they're like, that was okay. The response from everyone who came back was, we want more. We want more. So I recently completed a trainer of trainers training, so I can come back and train our staff in restorative practices. This isn't something we're looking to do overnight. Our staff is already well overtaxed with remote, hybrid, virtual learning and dealing with the pandemic, but something that we slowly hope to roll out over time. And through these restorative practices, what we look to do is we look to be more collaborative. So we understand that people are at their happiest and they're at their best when we do things with them rather than to or for them. And through restorative practices, what we're looking to do is we're looking to build community and we're looking to build connection all through managing harm. And the way we do that is through that restorative box, by doing things with people with high levels of support and high degrees of control or expectations. And this is something that kids will then pick up on this language and share it with families. And I'd love to even host professional learning opportunities with families to learn all about effective statements. If I go back a quick slide on the continuum, but how to use effective statements even within your house. We were talking about it, I think, at our last workshop, but how do we change our language with our kids instead of saying, great job with your homework, focusing on the connection and the emotionality and saying, I'm so proud of the way you finished your homework all by yourself, talking about the way that people's actions make us feel rather than highlighting the behavior. What we want to focus on is the connection. And then another large part of this mental health piece is the fact that in providing universal screening for mental health, what we're guaranteeing is that there's equity for all students. There's equity in terms of capturing students who are suffering from mental health struggles. So you can see here on your screen that teen girls are more likely than boys to face depression and receive treatment. Well, if we universally screen all of our students and get active consent, then we're creating equity and making sure that boys are supported in their mental health struggles, and particularly depression, as well as girls. When it comes time to equity, when we talk about trans people, and the rates of attempted suicide are so much higher than other populations. So when we talk about equity in terms of sexuality, that plays a role in it as well. When we talk about equity amongst race and being Indigenous People Day today, the rates of suicide by race and ethnicity, the rates of suicide are higher for the American Indian population. And that's not surprising given the brutality of white colonization and forcing them to reservations and the damage that's been inflicted. So the rates are higher by race as well. And when we look at equity amongst race, this is a big teller as well of why we need to universally screen and provide supports within the schools, because 31% of white children outside of schools with mental health problems receive the support they need. But that level is cut down to 13%. 13% of children from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds receive mental health supports. So if you're a white child with mental health struggles, you're 3 times more likely to get the mental health support you need than if you come from a racial or ethnic diverse family. So when we screen for mental health, we're creating equity regardless of race or ethnicity. Again, the public schools, as the great equalizer, allow us to provide equity for mental health for all students. And it's not just the school's responsibility that Ringwood is out leading this way. I don't know of another district right now that's actively screening for depression, let alone screening for depression, anxiety, and ACEs. And we're ahead of the game, folks, in Ringwood. We're really leading the way. We were leading the way with our risk assessment procedures. Dr. Bernice was getting phone calls asking for support from neighboring districts for us to help them out with their procedures. But when we started this, there are 2 legislation bills right now. They're identical bills. One's going through the Assembly and passed. One's going through the Senate and went from the Education Committee to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. But these primary sponsors, from Assemblyman Conaway, Lampett, and Murphy, as well as Senator Singleton and Ruiz, this legislation is calling to mandate that all students grades 7 through 12 be mandatorily screened for depression. So we're light years ahead of the game. We're already doing this, and we're paving the way for New Jersey to show not only that this can be done, it can be done in a small suburban town with limited resources and limited staff, but it can be done well and have an impact. You saw the impact we had, the 40% decrease in depressive symptomology over 6 to 8 weeks. Using resources we already had, we just flipped it on its head. Instead of spending our time doing risk assessments, we were being proactive and providing supports. So when this came up, I reached out to Assemblyman Conaway and got connected with one of his aides, Kaylee McGuire, who's been phenomenal, and we've just been staying in touch and just going back and forth and helping the Assembly and helping the Senate and figure out the loopholes, the questions about how do we do this, how do we do it well, how do we do it efficiently, how do we do it online, how do we get consent, how does this all happen? We've really laid the blueprint for the entire state of New Jersey about how students' mental health should be cared for. And coming up, we've already purchased a virtual screening through the Ringwood Public Schools. We're going to be doing a virtual screening of the film Resilience. It's the best documentary I've ever seen in my 100+ graduate credits I've taken. It's by far one of the most moving documentaries I've seen. It moves quickly. We're going to be sharing out a link to the Ringwood families for asynchronous viewing from October 27th to 29th. It's a 2-day window. And then we're going to have a town hall discussion on the night of the 29th at 7 p.m. to talk all about this. Resilience, it's a film. Again, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris is featured in it. What I love about the film is it focuses on the biology of stress from adverse childhood experiences and why it's our number one issue that we're facing in terms of our public mental health, but then also the science of hope. It's not just gloom and doom. It's about, this is what we know. This is how we are going to attack this. So continue to check your emails as that comes out. Dana Clark from the organization said that she's going to send us the email about a week prior. So a week, which is only in like another week or two's time. Check your emails and you'll have those virtual screenings. It's asynchronous, so watch it, start it, stop it whenever you want within that 48 hours, and then come and join us for a town hall discussion on all things ACEs. But I'm so happy to be able to work for the Ringwood schools. I'm so happy to have the students that we do, the families and the staff, the Board of Ed that supports us in this work, because we were able to capture and support students last year that would have been missed and would have struggled. And conversations among students in the weeks after was just incredible. So I thank you all for your time tonight. If you have any questions or concerns, we'll open it up to some Q&A now for the next 10-15 minutes, but also feel free to shoot me an email if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact through the library's YouTube channel. You can shoot me an email or give me a call at my extension in district. But again, it's incredible work our students are doing, our staff is doing, and because it takes a toll on the staff as well doing this heavy mental health work. We're dealing with secondary trauma as well with our staff. So for a very small district with a very small staff, we're lucky to have the talented people we do and to put in the hard work. This is something they're committed to, and it's been amazing to see it blossom over the last couple of years, to go from risk assessments, the refinement of risk assessments, to this global universal screening that is leading the way in New Jersey and laying out the blueprint of how it can be done. I thank you for your time, and I'm welcome to open it up to any Q&A that we might have. Up to 25 participants. Awesome. Any questions from the families? Now's your time.
Steve, I guess I'll jump in. It's Jeanette. I guess because we have talked about it before, you went into a little more depth with me about the type of support, like how often the children were seen, and actually what you actually did to, without giving too many specifics, but just a general overview of what you do once you've detected that they're at risk.
Yeah, so, again, a precursor. So when we go back to that restorative window, right, the width column is high control and high support. So the first thing we did was, before we did all this, was we made sure our staff was trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. So they knew evidence-based supports that they could provide. So making sure that the staff has the proper CBT training before you open this up is extremely important. And then based on the different level they're at. So the students that were in the highly likely range, they were receiving twice a week services. And the students that were in the likely range were receiving once a week services. So we plan to roll this out in the next coming weeks through October and November. We wanted students a chance to reacclimate to school after the COVID pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see how the results differ from our baseline year of 2019-20 to 2020-21 school year. But depending on the level of risk they're at, depended on the level of support, once or twice a week for 20 minutes to a half hour. And what's really amazing is that, again, kudos to the superintendent and the board for approving this. Sometimes I throw ideas out there and I'm waiting for someone to tell me I've gone too far. But I guess that's the luxury of my job. But we actually provided extended school year summer support for students needing mental health support. Not only did we do it for the students who we identified as being at risk, but we opened it up to the entire district. We sent a survey out to parents. Anyone who feels like your child needs mental health support over the summer, we're here for you. So it's really amazing to see that continue, to see the same effort. And I think that's what we look for as mental health providers, is we look for the same weight to be given to the mental health as we do the academic. Because we know from Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we talked about a few weeks ago that if you're not in a good place socially, emotionally, and mentally, it doesn't matter. You can have the best curriculum and the best instructors, the best Google Meet session going on, and none of it matters if you can't access your education because of the mental health piece. And we're going to be looking on our results based on the anxiety as well, and determining a benchmark on how students will receive services. And parents get notified with progress reports 3 times throughout the year as well with those services. So let me clarify that. If your child came up at risk in the fall screening, and they were supported for the winter and spring, you got progress reports. So if your child came up not at risk in the fall, we didn't screen again, but our services remain open. Should there be a concern or a change in the family or a change in the child, just reach out to us and we can connect your child with a counselor.
That's great. I also had another question about the screening. Is that the link that you're going to send out for that screening, is that only going to be going to Ringwood residents, Ringwood schools, or would it be for the entire town? How could we get that out to the rest of the town?
I will look to clarify with the film company, because
Okay.
it is through an indie film. So so I just have to go back and check the contract, but I can clarify and see what we can get out there.
Okay, because I know next week they're doing that screening from MAWA on angst.
Yes.
And it was something that was canceled in March. And it seems that they're going to open it up to more people. And I guess they have the capacity to do that. I don't know how, but they can they seem to, it's not just people that were signed up for March that are going to be able to attend now, because it was sold out originally.
Gotcha.
I don't know if that would happen with this type of.
If not, Jeanette, I'll find a way that we can make it available to everyone. If the company says that they can't for this event, we'll figure something out. Because I've seen the Angst movie, I've seen the Like movie, Paper Tigers. There are a whole bunch of them out there, and resilience just is like a knife through butter. It's amazing. Oh, that's awesome.
Okay.
I have a parent saying that they took advantage of the summer support.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and I won't say who it is, but they just said that it was so valuable to their child and reflects positively on it, and thanks everyone, and hopes that we continue to make these services available. Yeah, so thank you for that feedback. It just makes sense. It makes sense that we value the mental health as much as we do as the academics. So thanks for that private message and the positive feedback. But other questions or concerns? Paula, I see you have a hand raised. Does that mean you have a question?
No, I have a comment.
Comment, jump on in.
Comment is, I am so impressed with everything that you're doing. I mean, this is truly an innovative program, and to have mental health be actually part of the academic program is just, beyond words. Ringwood is very fortunate to have this program, to have in-school services. There's no place else that's doing what we're doing in New Jersey. So you and your staff are to be commended.
Thank you, Paula.
You're welcome.
Other questions, comments? You can throw them in the chat if you'd rather type it out or chat. And if there aren't any other questions, I'll be the last one to leave the room. So if there are questions and you want to hang, feel free to hang. And like I said, if you have personal questions that you don't want to ask on the recorded Zoom meeting, shoot me an email or we'll connect by phone as well. I'm happy to connect anyway. Paula again?
I think I lowered my hand, but it's still. I have another comment or question. Since we've been doing mental health Mondays, we try to pick various topics that would be, of interest to people. And I was wondering if anyone in the audience has any suggestions or desires of what would be, what are you interested in that we could try to present to the community?
You got two dozen captive audience, so people jump on in. What do you want to see more of?
In the past, we've done addictions, and I feel that's something that could definitely be useful to be repeated.
Ms. Netterfield, I saw you unmuted. Did you want to jump in with something?
Yes, I have a question. The program sounds wonderful, and being a nurse, I like the idea of being proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah.
I do have a question though. Are we going to take what we've learned here and try to do a preemptive strike as far as dealing with programs in our school like bullying, which will cause these issues, and try to kind of get a more proactive program for something like bullying, which seems to be kind of stalled the way it was when my child was older and went to school, and then having to deal with it again with my younger child. So I'm just wondering if there's any way to try to kind of.
Yeah, keep swimming upstream. I love it.
Yes.
No, and those are the questions I love, right? Because this starts at suicide prevention, and then this thinking goes upstream and it's depression. It's like, okay, well, how do we get ahead of depression? And it's looking at the trauma that leads to depression. So absolutely what you're talking about. It's not only adverse childhood experiences, but it's issues of bullying and kindness. And I think that ties directly into restorative practices. So restorative practices and the use of restorative circles and building community within the classrooms, what the research has shown is decreases in bullying, because what you're doing is you're creating a community of connection amongst peers. And the way I like to describe it is that oftentimes what happens in schools is that our primary focus is on delivering content. And through delivering content, we establish connections. But through restorative practices, when we focus on connections as the primary focus, the content all comes. But what we've established is friendships, we've established trust, we've established norms, and we create equity and student voice within the classroom to be able to have responsive circles. If there was a peer issue between me and Paula, that's something that we could bring up, and Jeanette could say, you know what, Ms. Smith, like, can we have a circle? Can we get together? Because Steve and Paula had words in the playground and it made me feel really uncomfortable. So as those restorative practices training get rolling post-pandemic, absolutely. That will play a huge role in seeing that decrease. And then also at Ryerson through the advisory program. But the goal is to continue to get younger and younger. So I appreciate the question, Ms. Netterfield. And I've used restorative practices in my classrooms at Montclair State, where I teach as an adjunct. And in 13 years of teaching, it was the silver bullet. I was able to connect with students and develop community that I've never seen before. And all through these simple strategies that we were able to implement. So my hopes are that will provide the support for warmth, nurturing, and caring communities. And then sharing it with the community as well. Not just schools, but how do we bring families into that and educate them onto these practices on how to speak and how to problem solve, and asking the question like what happened instead of why'd you do that, because why'd you do that is always something like I need as the adult, so that I need that satisfaction, and the child usually will always shrug their shoulders and say I don't know, but when you ask them what happened instead, it's a much different response. So yeah, I'm happy to share more resources about restorative practices. And thank you for being a nurse during this difficult time.
You're welcome. Okay, well, thank you very much. I was just wondering whether it can be expanded to help in areas that we do have problems in the schools.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going upstream all the way to communities of care to avoid the bullying and these issues from, even causing more trauma or more depression or more anxiety.
Thank you.
You got it. Anyone else? Y'all are still a captive audience, even though you don't have questions. So I appreciate that.
I was wondering, I know you and I had spoken before COVID with Lakeland. Have you maintained a connection with them to, kind of broaden it and have the same type of program in the high school?
So that's where it's difficult. So Ringwood is pre-K through 8. So my jurisdiction as director of special services stops at 8th grade for Ryerson. But if they ever wanted to reach out and they ever had questions, we're more than happy to help share our expertise and our experience is what we've learned through rolling this out the hard way. Because really it did take like 2 years of planning, attorney review, board review, superintendent review, a year to train the staff ahead of time. It's not something that you could just flip a light switch and roll out. And I have to say, because we did the depression screening first, is why we were so able. We had solid standard operating procedures that allowed us to pivot and screen for anxiety and pivot and screen for ACEs because our staff had such a strong foundation. So
I
for
think
anyone who has students at Lakeland and they want to see this up there, feel free to reach out to their staff as well, and we'd be happy to connect and help. And Ms. Schifaletti, I can look into that as well. I know that there's the program at Ryerson that I think Ms. Rothloff and Ms. Salamone utilize as well, where they have their advisors and their peer leaders. But I can look into that as well. I think that's a great form of connection. And it's actually kind of cool now that we are virtual. Maybe we can get them to connect as part of the advisory group with the younger students virtually. Because that always creates a logistical issue, like busing kids from one school to another. But how cool would it be if we had those students in those leadership roles to visit the younger students? It's a great idea.